Good morning, everyone. This is Amy Lemley with John Burton Advocates for Youth. We're right at 10 o'clock and getting ready to start this morning's web seminar, How THP Plus Providers, Youth Shelters, and Campuses Can Use New State Funding to Address Youth Homelessness. So we're very excited for today's conversation. We'll give everyone just about a minute or two more to join the web seminar, and then we'll get started. Thank you. All right, let's get started. Again, Amy Lemley with John Burton Advocates for Youth. Very excited to share the information we have today and to hear from our presenters. But before we do that, we'll start as usual, just making sure people have the information to participate. The call-in number is on the screen. And then today's presentation materials and audio will be posted on our regular website under Research Training and the Training Archive. It'll also be posted on a special HAPP implementation project page we have, and I'll be sharing where that location is in just a moment. And then the presentation is also available for you to look at now under handouts. It's shared as a PDF, so we know some people like to look as we go, so you can do that if you'd like. And then, as always, the real value is the opportunity to ask our presenters questions. So we're delighted to have people with a lot of great content knowledge presenting today. So just as you have those questions, please type them in. I'll be monitoring them, kind of culling through the ones that have the most general applicability, and then we'll get through as many of those as possible. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover on today's call or web seminar. The first is just the real fundamentals about the Homelessness Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, what we'll lovingly call HAPP. Then we're going to look at 3 examples of last year's in-state investment in homelessness, the Homeless Emergency Aid Program, how that was used to serve homeless youth. One example will be kind of an expansion of a THP Plus-like intervention. Then we'll look at shelter and then also look at a campus intervention. So how did that happen under a similar but slightly different program? Then we're really going to gear up. What can you do right here and right now to get ready for this exciting new opportunity of funding for homeless youth? And then we'll close it out with questions and answers. So to share this information today, we have myself, Amy Lemley, with John Burton Advocates for Youth. We're delighted to have Lahela Maddox with the California Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. She's the Director of Local Programs and Partners. Then following Lahela will be Debbie Pell with Bill Wilson Center, who is the Chief Program Officer. So both Lahela and Debbie just bring with them a wealth of information. Lahela at the state level was central in the HEAP implementation last year and is really leading the charge with HAPP implementation. And then Debbie has been really, leading a core homelessness and foster youth program in Santa Clara County using a variety of different funding sources. I think really serves as a model for how to draw down different funding sources, combine them creatively, so that we're putting the needs of young people first and these kind of categorical eligibility or the eligibility criteria second. So we're excited to hear how Bill Wilson once again did that with HEAP. But before we go any farther, we don't want to jump into the details before we really stop and thank our elected officials for their leadership. And so the Assembly Bill 101 was the bill that established this new funding source, the Homelessness Housing Assistance and Prevention Program. The governor signed it on July 3rd. And it was really made possible due to a broad coalition of people. Certainly our budget chairs, Phil Ting and Holly Mitchell, our Assembly Speaker and Pro Tem, many, many champions in both the Assembly and the Senate, and then many, many advocates in the community and providers. And many of you who are on this. And so you wrote the letters, you did the visits in the district and in Sacramento, and you just kept the drumbeat going that, yes, that homelessness is a serious problem and that homeless youth are part of that conversation. And so this is the second consecutive year that homeless youth have gotten a dedicated portion of the homelessness funding. And it's really to thank you to, our very progressive elected officials and a wonderful community of providers and advocates who came together to make the case, as well as, I would say, also very thoughtful, informed staff members in Sacramento who really took the time to learn more about youth homelessness and understand its relationship to homelessness more broadly. So bravo, California. There's a lot more work to do, but this is an important first step, or maybe kind of second step forward. So with that, I want to turn it over to Lahela, who's really going to step us through the fundamentals of this new program.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Amy, for a great introduction. I'm just going to go through these first couple of slides very quickly and then get into kind of the meat of HAPP and the homeless youth allocation. But I did just want to introduce myself again. So I'm Lahela Maddox, and I'm the Director of Local Program Partnerships for the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. And basically what that means is that I oversee the Homeless Emergency Aid Program, the HEAP, which was the $500 million, the new funding of $650 million, and the SB 918 Homeless Youth Act. And so collectively with those three programs, I focus on partnering and, kind of bridging that gap between our various systems. So quickly how we kind of came about, the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council was established by SB 1380 back in 2017. In 2018, with SB 850, the council was moved from Housing and Community Development over to the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency. And it had a variety of mandates, but I'm not going to go into those in detail. Amy actually will follow up with some documents that provide you with additional detail on the council. But basically, we were established to oversee the implementation of Housing First guidelines and regulations in state departments, and then additional policy goals to address homelessness in the state. So these are a few of our priorities for the council. Obviously, again, to implement Housing First policy, to explore the development of a state-level homeless data integration system. So for those who may or may not know, currently data bypasses the state. It is collected in the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, and that information goes up to the feds. And then the state relies on their annual report that comes out. And so we have been looking into a state-level homeless data system. The other, again, is to facilitate coordination between state departments that have funding and programs to address homelessness. And again, just to kind of align those resources and create better partnerships with our constituents. And then lastly, it's to develop a data-driven, evidence-based, high-level strategic plan for the state. So basically, again, the state doesn't have an action plan to end homelessness, and so we are currently working on that. This is a little more detail about the statewide strategic action plan that the council is working on. Several months ago, we initiated a collaborative process and we asked for white papers to be submitted to us. And basically, those were from researchers, advocates, providers, and other stakeholders to give us some feedback on their recommendations of evidence-based practices to address homelessness. So again, we're currently reviewing these submissions and we'll develop a draft. And then what we plan to do is schedule a series of workshops to engage stakeholders and to include those specifically with lived experience. So it'll be a very engaging process, and we'll have that ready in a few more months. So the programs and partnerships, so originally kind of everything was housed under the council, and it still is, but with the additional scope of work and the additional $650 million, we've kind of split it into two priorities in a sense. And so I oversee the programs and partnerships portion. And then Jenny Puttyfoot, who is our executive officer, she is working on the council side and the statewide strategic action plan. So again, my focus is implementing HEAP, the SB 918, the new program HAPP, and to successfully manage the partnerships that we have developed over this last year. And we also provide opportunities for peer-to-peer learning and joint technical assistance. So one of the things that I do for HEAP and will continue to do is we have been doing weekly office hours for the folks who are the applicants of the HEAP and HAPP dollars directly to us. And so that allows conversation to happen around the application process, around implementation, around partnering, and using other resources. And it's kind of turned into, again, an opportunity for them to learn from one another and for us to present best practices. One of the things we do that, you can switch slides, I don't have this on the slide, but one of the things that we do in the office hours just to highlight our connection for the homeless youth population is that once a month we do a focus call on homeless youth, issues, how to start conversations and different things like that. So once we get this new funding going, we will continue that. So this next slide quickly is just kind of an overview of HEAP for those of you who may or may not be familiar. So it's just some highlights about the program. It was emergency funds, and so the intention was for them to be extremely flexible and to be dispersed quickly. So I won't go through all the elements. You folks can read it and then ask me questions if you have any at the end. But I do want to highlight that again, it's 50% has to be obligated by January 1st, which is around the corner, and then fully expended by June 30th, 2021. So it is a very quick program, and it's meant to fill the gaps. And as Amy already mentioned, one of the key components of this program is the 5% allocation for homeless youth programs. And so that was a minimum amount that folks needed to spend specifically on our homeless youth population, because there is a recognition that they need very specific services and programs to meet their needs. These funds were dispersed up front. It was not a reimbursement program, so all of these dollars as of April 3rd have been dispersed into the communities. The eligible applicants were the 43 continuums of care and the 11 large cities, and then they went through their own process to disperse funds locally. The next slide will be on HAPP. And so this is a $650 million one-time block grant as well, and it provides local jurisdictions with funds to support regional coordination and expand or develop local capacity to address their immediate homelessness challenges. So it's really, some folks refer to this as HEAP 2.0. We try not to do that because there is still some conversation from advocacy groups that would like additional HEAP funds. So how I like to see it is it's an extension of HEAP with additional focus on regional coordination. And so the eligible applicants for this funding are the 44 continuums of care. One was added in this last, well, not added, but one continuum of care split into two. So there's now 44. There's 13 large cities. And this funding also gives an allocation to the 58 counties. So that is a new part. The funding allocations are $190 million will be dispersed among the continuums of care, $275 million for the large cities, and $175 million to counties. The allocations are based on a formula based on their total homeless population from the 2019 point in time count. So it will be a direct allocation again, and those formulas will be, those allocations will be posted as soon as HUD releases the final numbers for the 2019 point in time count. Again, the key elements of this are regional coordination. There are a variety of eligible uses, which we will define in our program guidance that will come out shortly. As Amy already mentioned, again, 8% this time must be used to establish or expand programs to meet the needs of youth experiencing homelessness. So again, speaks to the investment from administration on our homeless youth. And it doesn't require a shelter declaration. That's been a big question from folks because HEAP did require that, and HAPP does not. So these are some important dates, and actually I have a little one to update. So the program guidance, we expect to issue that in October, which is really great news because that'll give folks a really good idea about the program and what the requirements are and additional timelines. We will run it very much like HEAP, which means that we are trying to be streamlined. We are trying to be consistent with what folks are already doing. And really just trying to be easy and accessible as much as we can. So we will release an application map shortly after the program guidance, and that's a document that helps them be ready to apply as soon as we release the notice of funding availability and the application. Again, we don't have a date to release the application at this point, and again, that's because we are waiting for the 2019 point in time count. So again, once that gets released, we will do the formulas, the allocations, and then we will release the program allocations and then release the NOFA and the application. It is a short application window, so final date to submit applications is February 15th. Final date to award the funds will be April 1st. So we will do review and awards and disbursements on a rolling basis like we did with HEAP. Unfortunately, I don't have the disbursement timeline mapped out yet. But again, we will look to move fairly quickly like we did with HEAP. Important other dates are that 50% of the funds shall be obligated by May 31st. Actually, that's 2023. And funds shall be fully liquidated by June 30th, 2025. So this program has a little bit more of a runway than HEAP. So it's not emergency funds, though there is some flexibility with these dollars and some focus on prevention, outreach, and things like that, which I think are on the next slide. Oh, nope. Sorry. Just a quick slide. If you don't know what a continuum of care is, this is just some quick information and a link for you to find out more about what a continuum of care is, because they are basically they are mandated by HUD. Every state has a form of a COC in the country, and it's a geographically based entity, and they basically carry out the planning and local funding priority for homeless dollars. Most of their money comes from HUD, and then now with HEAP and HAPP, there is some state dollars as well. COCs can be counties, cities, or a nonprofit organization. So if you're interested in more information about the COC and how to connect with them, because they are a critical partner, especially for our youth programs, because with HEAP, we found that folks were not quite as connected in some areas with their homeless youth advocates and experts. So one of my jobs, again, has been to kind of help bridge that gap and provide the COCs with additional resources and contacts to support them as they decide how they're going to spend their homeless youth dollars. Coordinated entry system, briefly again, it's much larger than this one slide, but basically it is the way that the continuums of care assess an individual and to ensure that their housing crisis is addressed. And so you can think of it as like an emergency room and a triage nurse. And so the coordinated entry system is that triage piece that helps to identify the services that folks need and then get them connected to the right provider in their community. These systems vary for each COC though, so there isn't one type of system or one entity that provides this for the state. It is independent or individualized to each COC. And just quickly, so these are the HEAP expenditures currently, and so you'll see the bulk of the money for HEAP has been allocated by the jurisdictions to capital improvements and services. And some of you may wonder why the rental assistance and subsidy portion is lower. And it doesn't mean that we don't need those things. It really has more to do with the spending period and the fact that these are emergency dollars. So a lot of them put a lot of their money into services, which then could be rental assistance and subsidies as a part of their service package. Usually the rental assistance and subsidies is for master leasing or place-based rental assistance. And then in the services section is where folks are getting maybe assistance with deposits or other things. So it's statewide, that's kind of the spending picture for the HEAP dollars. And then just kind of quickly back to HAPP, and really for HEAP too, our focus, HEAP was flexible and emergency. HAPP, again, is continuing that, but also really stressing the evidence-based practices, regional coordination, and services specific to the needs of youth. So this is a great conversation to be having, even though the applications aren't ready, to be submitted. Folks need to be at the table right now so that, the right programs and services are provided for our youth. And so again, the fact that this funding source has a specific allocation to youth and has some specific language around that speaks to the fact that the services need to be individualized, and those of you that are on the phone, whether you're a provider or an advocate or a county or city, we do have opportunities for you to engage and connect to ensure that you are meeting the requirements of this program. So this, again, just some allowable uses. These are straight out of the statute. And again, you'll see, it's housing, rapid rehousing, incentives to landlords for deposits and holding fees, hotel and motel conversions, prevention and shelter diversion. So there is still a large range of allowable uses. In our program guidance, we will provide some additional examples or definitions on some of these, but for the most part, they're pretty self-explanatory. Number 8 is about new navigation centers and emergency shelters based on demonstrated need. And so that's just, to ensure that folks are meeting that need and that we don't have, navigation centers or emergency shelters with vacancies and then wanting to add more. So it's just to kind of balance out their capacity. So again, this one highlights the including for youth and the demonstrated need around shelter. So there are specific requirements that have to be met in order to be allowed to use the funds for shelters or navigation centers. And the thing with youth is that, that may or may not be the direction that folks want to go. Navigation centers, or emergency shelters, we know that, transitional housing and shared living is a great opportunity for our youth. And so it's not that you can't have shelters and navigation centers for youth. It's just understanding if that is the right program or service that is needed in your individual community. So that's just an area that our staff will take a closer look at when folks are submitting their applications to use the new funding. These are some documents you can access online that explain kind of if you want to do permanent supportive housing, which state department offers that funding and how to access that. So, and the next slide is kind of the same thing. They both speak to the resources that are available and who to contact and how to kind of leverage some of those dollars together. And then lastly, this is just my contact information, as well as Jenny Putty, that's our executive officer, and kind of all of our media, website, whatever, that you can reach us at. And we are happy to do presentations or be part of panels or workshops to support your communities in addressing youth homelessness. So anything we can do to offer additional support or resources, we are happy to help with.
Thank you very much, Lahela. That is great information, and we have a lot of questions for you. So, and I think this, for those of you who haven't gotten a chance to submit them, it's an amazing opportunity to, ask Lahela directly. Again, the program guidance isn't quite out, but get a little bit of a sneak peek in what's coming down the pike.
Yes,
So from
absolutely.
here, well, wonderful. Thank you for being on it and for being available for Q&A. So again, this is our attention today. We're really all about the homeless youth provision of HAPP. And so what we want to do is kind of build on the lessons learned from HEAP to make this program work even better for homeless youth. And Lahela, I think I'm picking up a little background noise. I'm not sure if you're able to mute your phone. It's a little bit of scratching going on. Okay, I think you must have gotten it. And so I want to direct your attention to a publication that John Burton Advocates for Youth released in May. We surveyed continuums of care and large cities and did a series of in-depth stakeholder interviews to understand how the homeless youth money for HAPP, or excuse me, for HEAP was spent, and found that 10.3% of HEAP funding went to homeless youth, which was more than double the 5% requirement. Shelter, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing were the most commonly used interventions. And we also found a lot of interesting findings. Certain parts of the state were much more likely to go above 5%. Certain parts were much less likely. So really encourage everyone to read this publication. It's just absolutely the case that there are just parts of the state that are more or less likely. The size of your COC is a factor as well, like the amount of funding they're getting. And so please, let's start by drilling down and learning those lessons. Specifically, what we learned is that shelter, transitional housing, and rapid rehousing were the three most common interventions that HEAP was used to fund. And so we thought it'd be helpful for these, three interventions to do a case study and to hear from providers that used HEAP to expand their organizations. What did they learn? What did they do? What guidance do they have for all of us as we move forward into HAPP? And so we're going to start with Bill Wilson Center. We're delighted again today to have Debbie Pell on the line. And Debbie's going to talk us through two ways that they use HEAP. And so let's start with our case study number one, which isn't as much expanding THP Plus as much as it is almost complementing it. So why don't I turn it over to you, Debbie, and you can walk us through this, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Thank you, Amy, and good morning, everybody. So I'm really excited to share some of the efforts that we've done in Santa Clara County, especially for the youth programs. And what we did is we received $1 million in HEAP from the city of San Jose to fund a new program that's sort of a hybrid between our THP Plus program and our rapid rehousing program. And this funding allowed us to add another 20 beds for former foster youth, former probation youth, homeless youth between the ages of 18 and 25, to create a 20-month program for them where we broke it down to where we're paying the first 6 months of 100% of their rental assistance, and then the next 6 months it titrates down a little bit to about 80%, and then the following 6 months titrates down a little bit lower. That enables us to provide all kinds of case management services and supportive services to really help these young people sustain their housing and be able to manage it once we phase out of the program. So that money came from the city of San Jose. They actually gave us 9% of their HEAP funding as opposed to the 5% in order to support that program. And I think the interesting part about how that came about was having good relationships with your city people. And when everyone knew that this money was coming down, everybody was, putting in their proposals to the city housing and of what they wanted to do, and that was presented at a meeting. We went to that meeting, we saw the proposals, and we spoke at the city council meeting and said, hey, we want to do this, and we think some of the funding should go to this particular program, the City Council really liked our proposal, and they made some adjustments in what they were going to originally release their monies to in order to support this.
So Debbie, before we go to the shelter case study, can I ask you a few questions about this program?
Sure. Yes.
We often hear, you know, this is a one-time funding. We can't create a program with one-time money, but it appears that that's exactly what Bill Wilson did. So can you talk us through your thought process as you were deciding how to utilize this opportunity, and what are you going to do about the fact that this is one-time money and this money is going to go away?
So this particular funding is actually going to be spread out over the course of 2 years. And that's why we limited it to 20 individuals, because that's going to get us through all of the young people that we serve before, you know, the funding runs out. So it is one time. We are hoping that we can expand upon that with the HAPP money. And if not, we will look for other sources that that we currently work with, you know, in order to continue, you know, funding this program. We're sort of excited about it. We want to see, you know, what our outcomes are going to be, and you know, we'll utilize that information to justify, you know, why this needs to continue, and continue to talk to our legislators, to our city folks, to our county folks. The Wilson Center is the largest provider for youth homelessness in Santa Clara County, and so it's really important to continue to talk to, you know, the people on the county, the people at the city, and establish these relationships in order to get continued funding for these programs.
Well, thank you, Debbie. I'm going to turn to shelter. I know you have some lessons learned to share, and then I have a few more just kind of follow-up questions about Bill Wilson's approach, but let's now turn to your youth shelter.
So our youth shelter is a 20-bed shelter for young people between the ages of 11 and 17. It has operated under a group home license for, 35 years, and at one time, we were going to, with the continuum of care reform, we were going to turn it into an STRTP, short-term therapeutic residential program. And then we decided to withdraw that application and to continue as our very core program for our runaway and our homeless and our high-risk youth that really don't have any other opportunities. And for all the years that we've run this, we were able to draw on Title IV funding for many of those youth who weren't in the system, but came in voluntarily and could apply for funding through the Title IV-E, AFDC, and that has sustained our program for all these years. With the CCR implementation, we lost $1.1 million a year to fund that program. So we have drawn on multiple sources to continue operating this program. We serve easily 200 youth per year. We are still operating under a group home license, which will change to the Runaway Homeless Youth Shelter license probably by January. And that is still a licensing category. It's a subgroup under group home license. So it is, and that's an important thing to know, because anybody who's going to run an emergency shelter for young people needs to have some sort of a license to do so. With some sort of, you know, oversight by the state and at your county regional offices. So this particular HEAP money came, you know, at the perfect time in order to give us, you know, a year of solid funding for this program. And we got 5% of funding. Now this came from the county. The Office of Supportive Housing was in charge of this particular pot of money, and we did get the minimum 5% to run it. So at any given time, we can serve up to 20 youth. It's a co-ed program. Their average length of stay is about 3 to 4 weeks. The big goal is family reunification, so it's very heavy in services to work with the entire family to get that child safely home.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm going to turn now to, when we spoke in preparation for this, you really had some great lessons learned that Bill Wilson has drawn from this experience. And if you could talk us through that, we'd really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of the things that I think are the most important lessons learned is your relationships with your county and your city officials. Get to know them now. For anyone who's considering using the drawing from the HAPP money, it's really important to start having conversations with city and county officials. The money comes down and it gets dispersed separately. The city gets a chunk, the county gets a chunk. So, find out, who's managing what and start relationships. The other thing that is that makes it a little bit easier too is if you build off existing programs that you already have as opposed to creating a new program. Not to say that you can't create a new program, because you certainly can, but I think we got very lucky, especially with this emergency funding, and it was such a short turnaround that we had existing programs to build off, and so it made it a lot more viable for us. I think it's also important when you have opportunities to consider bringing in young people who can speak to the issues. I find that our legislators are much more interested in what a young person says than sometimes what we say. Santa Clara County's point-in-time count showed that 30% of our population is comprised of the young people under the age of 25. So as we move forward and try to get continued funding to support our programs, I would definitely want to emphasize that 30% of our county population of homelessness is the youth, and so money needs to be, directed to complement that. Other things that we have done is, as our county was preparing for, what are we going to do with this money? How are we going to split it up? They did do focus groups throughout the county, and so if you have an organization, a group of young people to host focus groups, it's really important to be visible, to be relevant, and have that opportunity for your young people to contribute to the conversations. Some of the grants are complicated and pretty labor intensive, and we're very fortunate to have a wonderful team of grant writers who have experience with these types of programs, and I think that helps immensely in when we are applying for funding. And then I think the last thing is, and what we like to do frequently is we want to look for where the gaps are in terms of our system. I know right now, currently, we're seeing a pretty large gap for youth who are on probation, who do not meet any kind of criteria for incarceration, but their families don't want them, or it's not a safe situation for them to be in. And we are getting calls almost daily from probation on what do I do with this young person. And of course they do not fund any kind of placement for these young people, but they're also like, I don't know what to do. And so they call on us, and we are able to help them. So I think looking for, those kinds of areas of the underserved population is also, good for a conversation with your city and county officials.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Those are, for just kind of, you guys went in there, you figured it out, you were creative in how you use this funding to complement existing programs, but kind of create a new program, and then also plug a really serious hole. So those are some examples kind of related to THP Plus and shelter. I'm going to just briefly share and we're getting a number of questions around this specifically, Debbie, so if you could stay, we'd really appreciate that as well.
Of course.
Around student homelessness. And so, we focus on student homelessness as an organization, as do many of you on the web seminar. And so we're also really hoping that this funding goes to address that issue as well. And so one organization that focused on college student homelessness last year with HHAPP funding is Lutheran Social Services. So unfortunately, they weren't able to be on today's web seminar, but I'll briefly share what they did. They essentially, before a HHAPP, they operated transitional housing, rapid rehousing, and scattered site permanent supportive housing. And so they always had received referrals, from a variety of places, but they didn't have a formal relationship with their campus. And they really took advantage of HHAPP to change that and to formalize that relationship. So they received a $700,000 grant from HHAPP, which allowed them to expand the number of homeless students that they're serving from 25 to 37, and really to forge a formal relationship with San Joaquin Delta College. And so now they receive, direct referrals from San Joaquin Delta when a homeless student, expresses that they're experiencing homelessness from a program coordinator that's on campus. And so they've kind of, instead of kind of thinking they might get homeless students, used HHAPP as an opportunity to tighten up that referral process in combination with expanding capacity. And the issue of student homelessness is a very serious one. It's something that many elected officials are thinking about, talking about, and so it's another conversation to have with them. So that's just a little bit about campuses. And so from here, we're going to kind of back up and just kind of step through all right, we've learned the fundamentals of the program. We've had a few brief case studies and lessons learned from how HHAPP was used to address youth homelessness. Now, what do we do for HAPP? And so these programs we're going to step through briefly and then move on to questions and answers. So certainly the first is to consider the programmatic implications. That's something that none of us need to wait for any guidance. You have the state law there. It's available. There will probably be modest kind of clarification, but fundamentally that is our source code. That is what is directing the program. And so really start by, what does this program mean for me? Go through the same process that Debbie described, where how can we utilize this funding? For THP Plus, it means adapting your program to comply with rapid rehousing. So as Lahela said at the beginning of her presentation, a fundamental difference between HAPP and HHAPP is that HAPP is more targeted on evidence-based practices. Well, it is exclusively. And so those allowable uses are the allowable uses. And so you might have noticed that transitional housing really isn't one of them. And so many THP Plus programs around the state operate their program as a rapid rehousing program and even get federal rapid rehousing funds. So for those of you who don't, we're going to talk a little bit about that adaptation. For youth shelters, it's really, again, doing what Bill Wilson did, identifying how to use. And then, as Lahela said at the beginning of her presentation, if you're thinking for shelter, going through those additional steps to demonstrate need. And then for campuses, it's really making that match between the campus and the housing provider. So let's go and talk about each of these just a little bit. So THP Plus has the key elements of rapid rehousing, and you see on your screen right there, housing identification, rent-in and move-in assistance, and case management services. Those are the three pillars of rapid rehousing. And again, of the existing THP Plus providers in the state, a select number operate them as rapid rehousing programs. The National Alliance to End Homelessness has an excellent toolkit on rapid rehousing for youth. It has probably 12 different webinars, different publications, They also had a national multi-year learning community where they brought together youth providers of rapid rehousing and took a lot of time and effort into understanding how the generalized rapid rehousing model can be appropriately used for youth. And so there's a wealth of information there. So if you're a THP Plus provider, my first recommendation would be to go to that website, look at that toolkit, and really think about those key modifications. A key one, and there's a lot more there than this, is the young person being the leaseholder. Now, that isn't always the case in every jurisdiction that grants rapid rehousing dollars. I'll just say that briefly. There's so many variations, but that is the general practice for rapid rehousing. And so for some organizations, that would be a change in their practice. But that's step number one, is really going in and thinking about those tweaks. If you do that, however, thinking about, all right, we do that, we're kind of compliant, we are a rapid rehousing program, how would we want to use this new funding? And so on the screen here are just a few ideas. Certainly expanding the number of youth served, as you saw that Bill Wilson did and Lutheran Social Services did. Also, however, for THP Plus, to update the rate could be a possibility. For many of you who are THP Plus providers, you know that your local rate has not kept pace with inflation and has certainly not kept pace with the cost of housing. And so that could be a strategy. Another one is establishing a special rate for parenting youth or youth with disabilities. And that is something different counties, Santa Clara County, for example, Bill Wilson Center, has a special rate for young people who are young parents. We know serving young parents or youth with special needs is much more intensive, and so to consider establishing that. Another one is, broadening or liberalizing your eligibility criteria. This is something we tried to do last year legislatively. Unfortunately, we're not successful, but we know many young people who achieve permanence at age 16 still face housing insecurity and homelessness. And so that could be something to consider. Another one is to opt into AB 1255, which enables young people to participate in THP Plus for a third year. So that blue hyperlink on your screen is a list of the 28 counties that have opted into 1255. So if your county hasn't, that's another thing that your THP Plus, as a provider, you might want to go to your county and say, maybe we should think about this and allow young people to have that extra year of the program. So again, this is food for thought. This is a local decision that you need to think about with your local public officials about what's right and what would generate the support to get this funding. Youth shelters, there's a lot of different options. As Debbie mentioned, number one is replacing that lost 4E funding. I mean, this is a very serious question. We have a network of runaway and homeless youth shelters that have drawn on 4E, and that is, due to CCR, continuum of care reform, that is no longer possible. So if we want to sustain that network of shelters that are critical, we need to find some funding, and we need a permanent source of funding for those. But in the meantime, going and using HAPP to do that is one thing we can consider doing today. Another one is funding stays past 21 days. We know many of the runaway and homeless youth shelters are restricted, if you have that licensing category, to have young people in care to 21 days. We hope soon there'll be a legislative fix to that will allow them to be in the shelter till 90 days. But again, this funding could combine with existing funding, fund those longer stays. Offering the kind of reunification services that Debbie alluded to, as well as really conducting staff to conduct housing search and to provide aftercare. And then lastly, as Debbie mentioned, is formalizing that relationship with juvenile probation. We know young people who are juvenile justice involved need more access to housing. There may not be the funding source locally, and so reaching out to, ask your juvenile probation partners to help use their political influence to help you get this funding. For campuses, the really first step is connecting with your housing provider. We've gotten a number of questions that have come through that, campuses would like to apply directly for HAPP. They can't. The only eligible applicants for HAPP is a continuum of care, a large city, or a county. And so if you are on a campus and you're thinking and caring and working on student homelessness, you really need to find that housing provider who can be connected to one of those entities and to partner with to receive that funding. And so a few different ideas here. One is create rapid rehousing slots for homeless students, create or expand. Funding services to assist housing insecure students to prevent homelessness. And so partnering with an entity that could offer, rental subsidies or emergency housing assistance, and then funding campus navigators, such as in the instance of Lutheran Social Services and San Joaquin Delta. So those are a few ideas, but the reality is your need is going to be what you need locally. And so the first step is really kind of identifying those partners to work with. So that's really the first step, is thinking through those programmatic implications. And then we go to these don't need to be sequential, they could be concurrent, is making contact with your COC, your county, and your large city. And so in some ways, HAPP has made it a little bit more complicated than HEAP because we have a third entity that will receive funding. And the reality, as Lahela said, every jurisdiction, this money, these are the three kind of applicants in law, but practically speaking, it's all done quite differently. I mean, sometimes the money for the county will go to the COC. Sometimes the county is the COC. So I'd like to be able to offer you a single approach, but it really means figuring this out jurisdiction by jurisdiction. As Lahela said, there's 44 continuums of care, 58 counties, and the 13 large cities that you see. We've been really working hard to keep the COC contact list up to date, and so that is available on our website. A large city contact list is available, and then we do have a county list, but we did not post that prior to the web seminar, so that's not on. So thank you for the person who looked for that, and just to let us know we do need to do that. But I really can't emphasize strongly enough, there's no time like the present to do this outreach. And it may take, if it's anything like our effort to keep these rosters up to date, it's multiple calls. It really takes a fair amount of effort to penetrate and to make sure you're talking to the right person who can give you the right dates, and you can really participate meaningfully in the process. Here's a little bit of lessons learned from the HEAP experience, is to really move quickly, particularly with the large cities. Our study on HEAP showed that the large cities had a much less formal stakeholder engagement process. We found that the COCs had often, a multi-tier, multi-part stakeholder processes that were very well publicized and much more accessible. Large cities, less so. And this is a generalization, so if you're with a large city, please don't take offense. But generally speaking, this was the case. And large cities are getting the biggest pot of money. Counties are. So large cities are getting still a sizable pot of money. So you want to make sure to move quickly with those large cities. When you speak to them, you want to clarify that 8% is the minimum. So even if their PIT youth count, if your point in time count for youth is lower, 8 is the minimum. And then this was a lesson learned that, when we talked with Bill Wilson, really heard about is, really expect to have to educate your COC, county, and large city on foster care and homeless youth. Some of them are extremely sophisticated and do very deep work with youth and foster care, and others do not. So don't expect that they know anything about homeless youth or foster youth, and just be prepared to have those conversations. The next thing we do, so we've thought through our program, we've found that COC, large city, and county contact, and now we want to know how many young people were homeless based on your 2019 point in time. So on the screen you have the 2017 data. We went through the 44 COCs. And the truth is, every COC has done their point in time. On the website, we put in all the point in time figures that were available. We have data for 30 of the 44 COCs, but the reality is, for those of you who are in these 44 COCs, that information is available. So even for the jurisdictions where the numbers weren't publicized, the count has been done for some time. And almost every jurisdiction had, a report or a press release or something issued. And so really want you to kind of go out and find that information, either from our spreadsheet. If the number wasn't there, we're going to keep trying to find that locally, but you can do it on your own as well. And so what you have here is the number of unaccompanied youth under 18 plus the number of unaccompanied youth 18 to 24 divided by the total number of homeless persons. And so for 2017, that was 12%. And then you're really calculating from there. The next step is the minimum allocation for your administrative entity. So you can see here, this is for the state. The COCs are getting 190 million, so at least 15.2 should go to youth. The counties are getting 275, so a minimum of 22 should go to youth, and then same with large cities. So that's it on a state level, but you want to calculate this for your local jurisdiction. And what we really know is that homeless youth far exceed 8% of the total homeless population in many jurisdictions. So on this slide, we have the numbers for the top 5 jurisdictions for the data that we have for those 30 of the 44 COCs, homeless youth as a percentage of the total homeless. And, this is multiples of 8%. Watson, Santa Cruz, city and county, 29%, all the way to San Francisco, city and county, almost double the 8% at 14%. And so we know the minimum is 8%, but we know many areas are experiencing a much higher rate. And so this is information you need to have those conversations that Debbie was talking about, to make the case that yes, 8% is the minimum, but certainly not the maximum. And there are a lot of compelling reasons to request a higher percentage of funding. These are, points that I've made before, and I think we should all keep making, which is, youth homelessness has been historically underfunded. Unlike non-youth homelessness, this money is not sitting on top of existing housing programs. I just want to restate that. For example, there are existing adult housing homelessness programs, and this money is kind of sitting on top of that. In many jurisdictions, there is nothing for this money to be combined with. So this historic underfunding of youth homelessness is a very compelling reason to request a higher percentage. Newly available data about the prevalence of homeless youth, and then this issue of college students. And I just want to say that there is the college student issue, for some, can be a more accessible conversation about youth homelessness. Many elected officials have college-age children or had college-age children. And the idea of homelessness among college students can kind of shock them out of maybe their preconceptions about who is a homeless youth. So do whatever you have to do, but be aggressive. And as you can see from the bottom of the screen, HEAP jurisdictions in their applications put in that they were going to use 6.8% collectively, but they used 10.3%. So, don't worry about asking for too much. Also just want to share with you that certain jurisdictions have had big increases in the percentage of homeless youth since 2017. So these were some, again, from our initial analysis of the 2019 point in time. I think what's interesting about the difference between these arrows and those previous circles is, these tend to be, like, except for Richmond, Contra Costa, these other ones are kind of not the high urban areas. So it seems like the youth homelessness is growing faster in the kind of less urban places. We're seeing the larger growth. But in terms of as a percentage of youth homelessness, it's maybe the other way around, more of the San Jose, Santa Clara, and San Francisco. So I'm not sure if that's totally the case, But this is just more information to equip you to have those conversations and to go in with your elected officials, make sure that they know that this dynamic is happening so that they can allocate the appropriate level of resources to homeless youth. I do want to say, however, let's say you're in a jurisdiction that has a very low point in time count for your youth homelessness. We do not want you to feel like, well, we're just going to get the minimum. There's no point asking for more. In our study in May, we found that there were a number of jurisdictions that had low youth point in time counts that had significantly higher investments. So you can see Mendocino County all the way to Oxnard and in Ventura County. In particular, they only had 5% identified in their PID, but they put a full 17.6% of their funding towards it. And that is because, again, local stakeholders like yourselves marshaled this information, used your existing relationships, and really made the case. And so we don't want anyone looking at that spreadsheet and saying, oh, we're just going to get the minimum because we have such a small proportion. There's also a pretty clear consensus that for youth, the point in time count is a massive undercount. We won't go into that in depth here, but no one is believing that the point in time count is accurate for homeless youth in particular. So kind of with that, we're going to go to step 5. And step 5 is partnering, considering partnering. What we learned from our analysis in May is that very few entities who were not COC grantees already received HEAP funding. Now, we can agree that we can say that's good or bad, but if you want to go and get that funding, our recommendation is to partner with entities that have existing contracts and that can facilitate the relationship to get existing funds. Some jurisdictions it may be possible, and it was in a series of instances around the state. The more common circumstance was for existing grantees. And so if you don't receive this funding, see what other youth provider or non-youth provider may, and strike up a conversation, which is, could we partner, could we subcontract with you to serve those probation youth, to serve those parenting youth? That is a way to get the ball rolling. And then perhaps if this funding is available in the future, you'll have the relationships and the experience to get the grant directly. But if you want to go for it and get it directly, far be it for me to discourage anyone. It's just something to consider. Then last is really just prepare for the release of this NOFA. So you might be wondering, Amy, this program isn't even released. Why are we doing this now? And it's really because the youth homelessness community has not historically, in some jurisdictions, been as well positioned to get this funding. And so it may take, in some places, a little bit longer to network in to get these resources. And so, as Lahela said, depending on when the HUD count is finalized, the application process may really be caught in that holiday squeeze. And so it's really never too early to get started in thinking through these program implications, making contact with your administrative entities, and starting to craft this. You can also start finding that experienced grant writer. We had several circumstances with HEAP where organizations that had used grant writers that were very successful for foundation grants write their HEAP application and really missed the mark. Being a grant writer for these highly technical public housing funding sources is fundamentally different than being a grant writer for other types of grants. And so start finding those really experienced grant writers. And our recommendation is, if you're saying, well, who's supposed to pay for that, Amy? Go to your largest private funder. Your largest private funder is the entity that probably is the most deeply invested in your work, and ask them for a TA grant to help you with this. Say, we have an opportunity of a lifetime, but we need help. We need a consultant to help us do this. We need whatever way you need help. But that is the entity, that's the funder who's going to say, yes, I'm so invested in you, I want to make this happen. And then last is really just visit the JBA website And we've got a lot of different materials on HAPP implementation, some fact sheets, some FAQs, a bunch of rosters that we always try and keep as current as possible. And here's a picture, a snapshot of that HAPP implementation website. And this web seminar will be posted on it, as well as the excellent material that Lahela forwarded me, which is really excellent kind of place to start to learn about these programs. So that's a lot, and we're now going to turn it over to Q&A. And there are a lot of really wonderful questions. If you haven't gotten a chance to ask yours, please type it in now. And so I'm going to jump in with a number of questions for you, Lahela, if that's all right. The first one says, the HAPP allocation is based on each COC share of homeless population per the point-in-time count. But how will the money be distributed for counties?
So it's the same formula. It's all linked to, for both the large cities and the counties. Their program allocation is linked to the COC that serves their region. So for example, LA, the city of LA, theirs is based on the point-in-time count that LASA, who is the nonprofit organization that operates their COC, it's their count. Same thing for the county. LA County will use, we will use the same number. And then that allocation is then, the formula is based on, because there's caps, so no more than, I think it's 45% for the COCs can go to one eligible applicant. So everything ties to the COC, basically.
Okay, great. So there was a question about the monthly homeless youth calls. Who are those for? And if the person who asked it is a COC representative, how do they participate in that?
Yeah, so currently those calls are specifically for the eligible applicants to HCFC. So it's the COC representatives, it's the large cities, and so there may be county folks on the call. It just depends on who operates the COC for the region. Eventually, we will get to the point where we will have larger webinars and larger workshops with SB 918, the homeless youth mandate. That comes with 2 staff assigned to me. So I'm actually in the process of hiring those staff. And so once they're on board, their focus will be partnerships with the local homeless youth providers and advocates, as well as policy. One is a policy position. And so then we will kind of open that up at some point to the general, to our general constituents statewide. But if you have a specific interest or a need or, need a linkage, I mean, certainly email me and reach out to me and I can help kind of walk you through the best way to make those connections and get that information.
Thank you. So this is a question for you, Lahela. You may not have you interact with a lot with these entities, and so I think someone's just asking for your point of view, and if you'd be willing to share that, we'd appreciate it. Why do you think permanent supportive housing hasn't been used a lot for youth, including not at all by large cities? Has there been, so just that's a question. I did see that a large share of the cost was capital infrastructure in the pie chart that you shared. Is that permanent supportive housing, or how does permanent supportive housing fit into this?
So I'll start with the pie chart first. So yes, the capital improvements could include that. So it's a broad category of acquisition and rehab, construction, renovations, expansion of current facilities. It's kind of, again, a broad range of items. It's not just emergency shelters. So it could be permanent supportive housing. There are actually several applicants that have awarded capital improvement projects for permanent supportive housing. I think in general, not specific to HEAP, but just in general statewide permanent supportive housing, some of it, again, just comes down to the funding and what's available. And so specific to homeless youth, I mean, the conversation has really been elevated, I think, over this last year with HEAP really kind of shining that light And as Amy has talked about in depth, you know, the number of college students and foster youth, and just really painting that picture for people to understand that. So I think, again, it's a combination of things. It's a combination of funding, it's a combination of providers and right partnerships, and Amy really did cover a lot of that. And so it's not any one specific, in my opinion, not any one specific thing or reason. It's really a combination of the way our system kind of has been designed over the years. And so, you know, HAPP, as well as some additional funding that's over with Housing and Community Development, does focus on permanent supportive housing and does have some target populations. That's the other thing, is that some permanent supportive housing funding has very specific target populations and very specific guidelines. Probably a good time to highlight that HEAP and HAPP are 100% state dollars. And so why I emphasize that is that oftentimes the federal dollars, again, are specific target populations, severely mentally ill, you know, a variety of other folks. And this is one of the, I think, first times, you know, that it's state dollars that is going out into the communities, and that allows some flexibility, and it allows the partnerships to happen. It allows the leveraging of dollars with dollars that are already out there. So it's very unique in that. And so I think it's just, again, it's just permanent supportive housing. Also, the challenge is you know, finding developers to partner with. And so one of the things about HAPP is that we've got to come up with, and just in general, we've got to come up with more outside of the box solutions. So you'll see one of the points in the statute is motel and hotel conversion. So it's using properties that we already have and renovating them to meet the needs in the community. And so, like Amy talked a lot about, you know, some of the issues with HEAP. And well, one, it was emergency, so there wasn't always time for folks to really look at new providers. But the other is that it's a lot to write a grant and to stand up these programs. And so I think our focus really is about regional coordination and partnering and leveraging those resources. What do you bring to the table? How can you strengthen what's already happening? You know, it doesn't always have to be a new program. It can just be, how do we better use, you know, use what's happening and add these dollars to expand the number of people that are being served. So that was a super long answer. Hopefully that answered the person.
It did. Well, this is a really, this I think is a question, but in it could be a clarifying point for everyone who's on it. A person writes, we applied for HEAP funding for 20 to 24 months of rapid rehousing. We were told when we received HEAP funding that all the money needed to be spent in one fiscal year, decreasing months of housing and services to 12 months. And so how did San Jose get funding for 2 years? And so I guess one thing, why don't I hand that, Debbie, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I think it was the city of San Jose's decision to take the allocation that they gave us and spread it over a 2-year time, and that's certainly aligned with our 20-month program. We had a 4-year ramp up and then a 20-month program. So I think it was the city's idea. It's what they wanted to do, and we went with that.
And I really want to, the general point that I really want to highlight there is that is a local decision, and they may not have known that. They may not have known they had that discretion. But those of you on the web seminar, you know, if you're getting told that, you know, make the case. 1 year is almost nothing. I mean, it goes pretty darn fast nowadays. And so if anyone is kind of saying it has to be in these shorter terms, try to, you know, help them understand the information that they do have the discretion to make it a longer period of time. So here's a great one, and I'm going to answer this.
Really quickly. Just, it also has to do with, and this is why you'll see the percentage of HEAP dollars in, you know, lower in rental assistance, is it's the spending period that the grantees have. So they have to fully expend and invoice it by June 30th, 2021. So some of them shortened their awards in order to meet that deadline and ensure that dollars were spent. Now, the benefit of HAPP is that it is a 5-year program. So there's more time to ramp up and ramp down. HEAP was a little more challenging in that respect, in that it's hard to ramp down, rapid rehousing or housing assistance that is, a 2-year program, just because of the spending period.
Thank you, Lahela. That's great clarification. So a point being made, a THP Plus has service requirements and regulatory expectations of school and employment. How do we reconcile this with the housing of rapid rehousing if we were to use HAPP for increased rates? The beauty is those school and employment requirements are the requirements of providers to offer the services to youth. In state law, there is no participation requirement for THP Plus. Now, different programs may have created those in concert with their county, but the state law does not have that. Now, for THP Plus foster care, there is a participation condition, one of the 5 participation conditions to be in extended foster care, but for THP Plus, there's not. And our organization worked with a collection of 39 nonprofits over the last 2 years to really try and, explore that, and to, to really demonstrate how the participation conditions are can be, at times helpful, but they can also be barriers to school. So the general thing, however, is THP Plus does not require a young person to do anything specifically in state law. It requires the providers to offer certain supports and services. And then what often happens at the local level is that gets translated into participation requirements. What I'd also just say is that for THP Plus programs, making this transition to rapid rehousing not only opens up the potential to access HAPP, but it opens up the potential to access all HUD rapid rehousing programs. So we're going to fight to keep THP Plus a strong, active, well-resourced program as long as I'm alive. But if you also if it's just not going to meet the need in your area, by making it rapid rehousing, you're going to be able to access an additional source of sustainable funding. So another just kind of follow-up point to your earlier point, Lahela, about COCs is a point that the person writes in. They say many COCs are in multiple counties. And so how does that work in terms of the point in time count?
You mean, I'm not quite sure. So the COCs, they do represent multiple counties potentially, like Shasta COC covers, Lassen County. So yes, some of them have more than one county. But the COC point in time count is when it's reported up to HUD, it's not designated per county. So it's the COC as a whole. So yes, each county is still, even though their count may be different, for the purposes of this program, as statute is written, is that it's still based on that same number, whether, and I'm just using Shasta because it's on the top of my head, but if Lassen had 5 and, Reading had 500, the allocation is still distributed evenly because the COC's count is 505. I'm just using those two as an example. So yes, there is some differences, and we understand that using solely the 2009 or any point in time count for any year does pose challenges. However, that is the only, at this point in time, that is the only kind of data that the state can operate off of. So that's kind of just where we're at with that.
Yep. So also staying with you, Lahela, and then I've got a good one for you, Debbie, and then we will be close to wrapping up. So appreciate everyone's time. This is a representative from a COC, and they're saying that there's data for 18 to 21, but PIT data for unaccompanied minors are harder to count because they're typically couch surfing. Can they use the McKinney-Bento numbers for this calculation? And so those are the number of...
For the HAPP funding? No, and that's because statute clearly identifies using the 2019 point in time count. So, using the McKinney-Vento number would not be allowable. Though we do know, as Amy has said multiple times, we know that the PIT count is underrepresenting homeless youth and unaccompanied youth, and we know that the definitions are different. Again, the benefit of HEAP and HAPP, and really as we move forward, which is the kind of the role of advocates and different partners, is to continue to highlight that and to continue to say, these are the numbers that we would really like to use. You're not the only one to say that. I was recently at another meeting, and that's kind of what we hear consistently. But again, one of the reasons why the state is looking at a statewide data system, and there is some flexibility in how funds are used for HAPP and HEAP. Again, so that is kind of the benefit, is that yes, the allocation is based on that, but what you can do with the dollars is so much broader, which is a really good thing for the jurisdictions to be able to do.
Great. This one's for you, Debbie. They want to know that when you brought young people into the conversation, did you work with local centers like the Hub?
Oh, absolutely, we did. We also have our own drop-in center, which is, we probably serve about 400 to 600 young people through the drop-in center, which was a good location. But the Hub was another option for us, and Bill Wilson Center actually has a contract with the county to run the Hub, so that made it very convenient.
Thank you. This is also a clarification point that a campus is not prohibited from applying directly through their county city COC process. So thank you for that clarifying point. It certainly is not prohibited. For HEAP, Imperial Valley College got funds directly from their COC. Mm-hmm. So if you are a campus, there's nothing about your status as a campus that makes you ineligible to apply to your county, your city, or your COC. And again, for those navigation, or if you're going to start a housing program, if you are less familiar with them, partnering can be an option, but applying directly is an option too, particularly given the crisis of student homelessness. People are very receptive to those arguments and those points. So this one's for you, Lahela. Does HAPP include a mandate or directive for grantees to engage in a local or statewide evaluation?
So there is a mandate for regional coordination, and in the program guidance and application, we will be defining kind of what that is. With HEAP, what we learned is that collaboration, people's definition and understanding of that ranges widely. And so, like Amy said, some are better at it than others. And so that really is more of the focus of HAPP, is to really kind of push for those inclusions to be happening. So with youth, with colleges. And so while there is still the ability for them to, when they submit, kind of create that narrative. And part of that is because the COCs have a strategic, there's no one like regional plan. The cities have a plan as part of their housing element. The counties have a plan, and the COCs have a plan that is mandated by HUD. So collectively, our goal with HAPP is to ensure that those three plans, because we know that they serve different functions, right? The city, the county, and the COCs, but collectively, there should be alignment of how they're using their funds and how they are working to end homelessness. So yes, that is part of it. Statute speaks on some of that. So if you look at that, and I can forward it to Amy so she can quickly send it out to folks so you don't have to search for AB 101 because it is very long. So I can send that out. And then if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. We will be doing some workshops once we release the program guidance statewide. We kind of do a roadshow So, attending those would be really great, again, for you to meet, and connect with your COCs and your cities and your counties, and with us. And so how we can, bridge those gaps.
Great. Debbie, a question for you. In the way you enhance your THP Plus program, was that for a single site or scattered site?
For the HEAP money, those are scattered sites. We call it transition in place, and it really follows the tenets of the rapid rehousing model, but the services are similar to those that we would also provide in THP Plus.
All
so
right.
They're scattered sites, yeah.
Great. Oh, and we've got another good example. Lake County Office of Education also applied for a grant through our COC and received money to assist college students with housing with HEAP. So thank you very much for offering that. So Lake County was also able to get that funny, Lake County Office of Ed. So thank you for sharing that. So, let me see if there's maybe one last
Sonoma
question.
Or Napa. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say there were about 6 to 8. There were about 6 to 8 COCs that awarded funds for college programs. So I don't have the list on the top of my head, but yes. So that just tells you that there are options for that.
Excellent. There's a COC that's written in. I won't read it out loud because I don't want to but essentially says that they have no use provider. Now, when we did our study, we came across another jurisdiction that's different than this jurisdiction that says no one is serving youth here. Now, our reaction when we did the study was like, yes, there are. You just don't know who they are. So I more than read the comment, want to really encourage those of you who are serving young people. Now, you might think, well, we're serving foster youth, but you're still serving transition age youth who are experiencing housing stability and homelessness, to reach out to those. Because for those who are really more squarely in the adult homelessness world, they really may not know you exist, and may not know that you're doing this. So it's interesting to see that, that kind of, sometimes those connections have not been quite made yet. I think that with that, there's some other more specific questions that kind of deal with more kind of local issues. So I think with that, I want to give you, Lahela, and you, Debbie, each of you both just the opportunity, if there's any last kind of thought or guidance that you'd like to share, please feel free to do so.
So this is Debbie.
Go
ahead, Lahela.
Go ahead.
So the only thing that I was going to add, and I was really glad, Amy, that you brought up the case study of the Stockton, San Joaquin Delta College campus. And we have noticed here in our county that there's a great deal of student homelessness as well, and that is another area that we've been focusing in on, and we've been working close with San Jose State University. Currently, we are looking to partner with them on housing opportunities using one of our federal grant sources. But I think that is a really strong area. We did a survey here with a research company about a year or so ago, and we were quite surprised at the percentage of homelessness amongst college campuses just in Santa Clara County. So I just wanted to highlight that that is another really great opportunity and area to help partner with the universities, local colleges to try to help those young people.
Thank you. And over to you, Lahela.
Yeah, well, just thank you for having me. And I just want to kind of, close for us in saying that, I just want to echo what Amy has talked about, is that it's about the partnering and education. I know that, there's an assumption that someone is handling one group or another, or someone is responsible, or someone has funding for that, so I'm not going to, worry about that. And so we've learned a lot about, you know, it's not for any malicious intent or whatever. It just really is, you know, lack of education and awareness. And so we've been really trying to work hard, again, in making those connections and bringing people to the table. And like Amy said, you know, don't be shy, you know, get to the table and share what you have to share, because quite honestly, they just really may not know. For COCs, any counties and cities, again, their focus is different. And while it, you know, while we want it to be larger and collective, they still have kind of their individual priorities. And so we have to do kind of some of that work. And again, we are here to support that work and that education with our partners. And so anything that you have that, you know, that you can contribute and that we can help, you know, make those partnerships, we are happy to do. And as Amy said, you know, here at the state, like we really are, with HHAPP and HHAPP and the council, really are invested in contributing and being at the table as well. You know, I have direct service, years of direct service, both at the county and the COC and the nonprofit world. And so that's truly my personal commitment, is to support this movement and make sure that people are just working together as best as we can to solve this, because there isn't one group or one funding source or one subpopulation that has the answer, and the state doesn't have the answer. And in closing, resources are not always dollars. That's really key for people to remember, is that we all have resources. Think of it as a potluck, right? If we all bring to the table what we have, and understand what each other has, you know, we rarely go hungry at a potluck.
No, that's a great way to look at it. We are getting a lot of questions specifically about this THP plus rapid rehousing, and you know, we'll collect all these questions and also consider either doing a web seminar or some kind of one-pager on how to break that down. Again, I really encourage going to that National Alliance to End Homelessness. I don't think there's anything original that we could contribute to that. The only special thing we might be able to add is a deep knowledge of THP plus, and so kind of looking at it through those lenses. But we want to be a resource for all of the THP plus providers who want to pursue this funding. And so let's call me, call Simone, if you have specific questions, or email us. And you know, if we get enough of it, we'll kind of put those together and say, okay, it sounds like we need to do more here. All right. Well, with that, again, thank you, Lahela, and thank you, Debbie. You're both awesome, and it's so clear how much you care and how much effort you're putting out to serve young people. So I guess with that, we'll wrap up, and we will have this posted later today on the website. I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks again. Bye.
Bye-bye.